I'm Michael Mandel. I'm co-founder and CEO of CompStak, and this is the Not Podcast podcast. And today I have with me Gabe Marans. I once was on a podcast, and the guy who was running the podcast says, "I'm here with Michael Mandel, my good friend." And I'm like, that's pretty funny because I hardly knew the guy. But in actuality, Gabe and I really are friends. He's really a friend. And I'm really thrilled to have Gabe on the Not Podcast. Gabe's with Savills. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
It's a pretty one-dimensional, quite boring background. But first of all, 100% correct. I've been on a bunch of podcasts. I've listened to many more. And it's rare that you get a chance to spend this time together in a professional setting with someone who you spend a lot of time with in a personal setting. So thanks for having me on, and it's great to be here. Long-time listener. My background is quite straightforward. I'm New York born and bred. I interned at Savills, which was then called Studley, just about 20 years ago. I'm now a vice chairman at the firm, and all we do all day, every day is the tenant rep side of mostly office space real estate strategy. So packaged in a different way, we help companies think and make strategic decisions about their real estate footprint. Again, mostly office, but increasingly about industrial and retail on a global platform. So whereas about 70% of our transactions are in the New York metro area, we're active in markets all the way from Tokyo through the Middle East, all the way through the rest of America, both north and south and central.
Awesome. I think you have an interesting background leading into brokerage. I'd love for you to mention a little bit about that and how you ended up in brokerage, because the brokerage industry is such, and I used to be a broker, that everybody has a different path to getting in. I don't know if it's the case now, but when I became a broker, there was no such thing as a job listing for New York City commercial real estate broker. How did you end up in the industry?
I'm an accidental broker. And I think most of the folks who are still in the business after 5-10 years are accidental brokers. I didn't even know the industry existed. So my history in a nutshell is when I was in college, all of my smartest, most ambitious friends who I was trying to mirror were getting jobs on Wall Street, mostly in investment banking. So that was a track that I wanted to pursue. I worked really hard. I secured a summer analyst role at this amazing bank called Bear Stearns. And I was studying abroad my spring semester, junior year. I had the job line locked up already. And then I started following the news and realized that the bank was going south. So I pivoted. I emailed everybody in my Rolodex. At that age, it's my parents' Rolodex. My mom happened to know somebody at Savills and all the other brokerages. I ended up interning there for the summer. And the rest is history, except for the fact that then Lehman collapsed after my summer internship. I then had to essentially canvass and cold call my way back into the company. I took the LSATs because I wasn't sure if there would even be a job waiting for me. But I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I'm glad I ignored that training and started July of 2009 full-time.
Awesome. Well, it's convenient that you managed to bring up your mom very immediately in the podcast.
Nina, if you're watching, I was thinking about you.
Yeah. So, because we decided that 99% of this podcast is going to be about your mom.
Naturally.
And the monogram socks that she gave you that you're wearing today, which maybe you thought I was joking about bringing them up, but in fact,
I should have known better.
You should have known better than to wear monogram socks generally.
I've one pair. It was the next in the rotation.
And the underwear, are they also monogrammed?
It's matching. Yeah, of course. It's a matching set.
That makes sense. And every day, different color for each day of the week.
Knowing me on some level, it's not a surprise to hear that.
Not at all. Yeah. Not even a little bit. Yeah. Awesome. So let's talk about how the industry has changed since you started in brokerage. You started basically in the GFC, right? And so what did you learn then? What happened then? And how have things happened since then?
When I started, there were no deals happening. And I remember a lot of the more seasoned professionals, they said, there's no better time to start, which was really encouraging, except my bank account wasn't loving that. So I persevered. And one of the reasons why it makes a lot of sense to start, not that you can plan it, but in a downturn, is the market moves a little bit slower. Certainly on the tenant rep side, it moves slower and more favorable to tenants as supply increases and demand goes down. So building relationships with landlords, building relationships with tenants, learning the vocabulary around being cost conscious, reducing your spend. This is a vocabulary that in 2008, 2009, 2010 was really popular. We then went through basically a decade-long period where that verbiage wasn't featuring as prominently as it did starting March of 2020. And so having grown up at a critical downturn in the market and then seeing a few other downturns in the market since then gives you the breadth of experience and history to better advise your clients, because no economic situation is the same as the one before it, but you can learn a thing or two from each of them that is applicable to the current one in a way that helps you guide your clients in a smart, strategic, and intelligent way.
Awesome. Well, I agree that it was a great time to start, because I started maybe a year and a half before you. I started at the end of 2006. And the reality is that when you start in brokerage, you don't make any money anyway, for the first couple years. And so for me, I came in at the end of 2006 into 2007, which was a screaming hot market, but couldn't really capitalize on it very well anyway, because I was still learning the business.
I'm sure you loved when people said even monkeys could make money in this market.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I was thinking everything was amazing going into 2008, and then saw everything collapse. So at least you didn't have to have a book of business that you thought you were building, see it collapse, because it started from collapse.
Oh, yeah. No, my hopes were not inflated yet. It was an idea, but it wasn't fully formed.
And maybe, to that end, you give a little bit of hope. I mean, we've been in a midst of recovery, but, maybe some of the people who started in brokerage, 2 or 3 years ago have been struggling and wondering if they can stick it out, and maybe this gives them a little bit of hope to stick it out, because it does help you really learn what you need to learn to succeed in an up market.
Correct, 100%.
And to that end, I think that carries us well into what we're seeing right now, which is that we are seeing a recovery in the market. Where New York is recovering better than a lot of other markets and has been. So wanted to get your perspective on that. Interestingly, rents are up in New York by our research with and in conjunction with the CCRA, the Columbia CompStak Rent Index. We've got rents up 12.2%, which might be less than you might be thinking about or seeing in other places, only because it's quality adjusted. So it takes out some of the craziness we saw with some of the trophy buildings that have made the market seem, I think, like it had a stronger recovery than it has. But overall, we're seeing 12.2% from Q4 2019. At the trough, we were down 12.7%, which may not seem as low as it might have been perceived. But overall, the swing from trough to today is 28.5%, which is the strongest recovery we've seen of any major market. Why do you think that is? Why is New York... New York obviously took a big dip, but why do you think New York has recovered so much better than other markets have?
City has always been a case of extremes. When a downturn hits, it hits New York fast, hard, furious, and often first. We saw that certainly during the GFC. We saw that during the dot-com bust earlier. We saw that during COVID. Market demand dropped off of a cliff. And we see that during recoveries as well. And there's a lot of reasons why it's a city of extremes. But to really answer the heart of that question, it's about what makes New York special as compared to all the other markets. And the answer always comes back to the labor. And in this recovery, why it's particularly unique is you've seen this evolution in the depth of the labor pool alongside the creation of, I wouldn't say new industries, but components or new components of existing industries, referencing AI to some degree, but other industries as well, including high-frequency trading. And so when you look at it through that lens, one of the first questions we ask our clients when they're saying, hey, we want to open up an office in the U.S. We just had a real-life case, a European tech company looking to set up a foothold in the U.S. We did a pretty comprehensive analysis of all the different potential gateway markets, mostly focusing on the East Coast because of proximity to the European and Asian time zones. And I thought New York was going to be a given. And it was a given, but not without a little bit of competition. But the reason why New York won, in spite of it ranking highest on real estate spend, it ranking highest on compensation spend, is because of the depth of the labor pool. The young people at the company wanted to work there. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So New York has created, not without its political issues, but New York has created this environment where young people want to move and live here. And because of that, the companies who are growing want to grow companies and businesses here. Plus the what I'd call this interconnectivity, this intersectionality in some way between the various different businesses in New York creates a very unique environment that's different than Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, D.C. The other cities have their advantages, but New York's advantage is miles ahead of everybody else.
What was the number 2 market?
Nashville.
Nashville?
Nashville. It was a curveball, but Nashville was the number 2 market.
I wouldn't have seen that coming.
And number 3, Charlotte.
Okay. That seems a little clearer than me than Nashville. Nashville's interesting. I'm surprised they even looked at that as a consideration. You wouldn't think that like a European company is even thinking about Nashville.
I think one of the keys was the co-founder was on a bachelorette party in Nashville like a few months earlier and just fell in love with the city.
Are you serious?
I think there was a little bit of like a bias that was being injected into.
Well, every bachelorette party, I thought every bachelorette party in America went to Nashville. I didn't realize it was an international phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an international phenomenon.
I'm actually going to Nashville tomorrow. I'm going to Nashville tomorrow for
bachelorette party on Tuesdays.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
right.
And also the Urban Land Institute conference.
Almost as fun.
It should be very similar, yeah. I think, actually. Yeah. So funny enough that for you to mention Nashville, I did not see that coming. Well, so you mentioned, AI being a trend driving recovery in New York, but that, makes me think about San Francisco. San Francisco is up 3.6% from the trough, and is still down 17.1% from 2019. So why do you think San Francisco? And granted, if you visited San Francisco lately, it is light years better than it was if you visited, post COVID. So don't want to be too down on San Francisco. But why do you think that the recovery in San Francisco has been so much weaker?
I think the political situation plays a role in that, coinciding with this AI boom. And so the market in San Francisco is probably a year or two behind New York. So I think San Francisco is going to get there. And you see that on the capital market side to a large degree. You see buildings starting to trade yet at discounts, but New York buildings are also trading at discounts compared to 2019. So San Francisco is going to get there. I'm long on San Francisco. But the market is much smaller than a place like New York, and the diversification in New York is much deeper. And so there was only so far that the New York market could fall because it wasn't reliant on a single industry. When you had this complete focus on profitability and reducing burn in 2023, when inflation started to rise along with interest rates, San Francisco bore the full brunt of that. And I think that introduced some hiccups to the recovery. In New York, it also impacted those tech companies, but the law firms, the banks, they weren't impacted as severely.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, the other thing that I've noticed with the San Francisco market is that, so much of that market is dependent on the uber large, tech companies, Meta, Alphabet, X, you name it. And, interestingly, what we've seen is that those companies had pre-COVID been expanding their presence in San Francisco proper. They pulled back from that post-COVID. They saw a lot of their employees move to the suburbs because they wanted to have like more space during COVID, right? And they haven't gone back. They have grown or gone back to their previous footprint, in the peninsula, but not in San Francisco proper. The AI companies are growing like crazy in San Francisco proper, but in actuality, that's a relatively small part of the tech market in San Francisco. And I think people don't realize that. It feels much bigger than it is, and it is big, but it's not enough to fully galvanize that market.
Completely. It's somewhere between a fourth and a fifth the size of Manhattan's real estate market. And so in comparison terms, it's a very, very different animal. I also think that the type of AI that's growing in the Bay Area, it's really more pure AI plays. You were talking about Anthropic, OpenAI. These are the OGs of AI, whereas New York is more about the applied AI businesses. It's about the Harveys of the world as it relates to legal AI. We're working with a number of companies that are tangential to financial services, fintech, marketing, ad tech, all of which have an AI bend. New York York is where they want to hire because the business is just easier to grow because so much of it involves tapping into other businesses from a diversity standpoint in terms of what they actually do. So there are different underlying dynamics, but I think you're right to call that out around San Francisco.
Yeah. So interestingly, we chatted a bit before the call, and you mentioned Series B startups signing 100 plus per square foot leases. What do you think is driving that? Because, the entire time I was ever in the real estate business as a broker and now at CompStak, it was always tech companies in Midtown South, and the 100 plus per square foot deals generally were not Midtown South, and they certainly were not, even in Midtown South, when you saw those kind of rents, it typically wasn't the startups. Mm-hmm. What's changed? Just too much money floating around with these AI startups? Is that what's happening?
I think that the money is a component of it, but the question is, why are they raising these massive amounts of money? And I think most of the headlines are going to focus on the cost for chips and to build these data centers and just the general cost of infrastructure. But I think the answer is a lot more nuanced. There is this massive competition for the right labor across the globe. And that's playing out in New York as well. And so if you're a company and you are looking at hiring the right number of people, you want to project a certain image and introduce the right type of workplace for your employee set, and that's going to push you to a certain level. There are other market dynamics as well. There is very little new development in the New York City pipeline. We're at a decades, plural, low in terms of that supply. You've had the removal of a lot of supply as somewhere between 20 and 40 million square feet of old office space is either slated for or in talks to convert to residential. So you remove that from the market. So you've had this contraction in the supply of office space in New York as you've had this increase in demand. But I want to mention something else because I think this is really important for people to understand. If you're the CFO of one of these startups that's raised $200 million and you're a Series B or a Series C company, you're looking at your entire spend also in proportion to one another. So your costs for payroll have increased at paces that far exceed the increase in real estate. Your insurance costs have gone up much, much higher as it relates to how much more expensive real estate costs have gone up. Your construction pricing, your furniture, everything has gone up at levels significantly faster than the actual real estate spend. So now all of a sudden, if you look at real estate spend as a proportion of the entire bucket of costs for that employee, it's much less. Yeah. And as a result of that, you can justify spending a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute observation because it's something I didn't realize when I was a broker. I was taught by other brokers I worked with, like, the office space of a company is so important. It's the second largest expense that these companies have. And I thought, oh, wow, behind payroll. And I thought, oh, wow, this is really important. And it was important. But until I became a CEO and I started looking at my P&L and my balance sheet and understanding the financials of how my company ran, I didn't have any concept of the fact that the number two expense is so small compared to the number one expense being payroll. And it puts everything in perspective for you. It means that, maybe I will take a little more space and have my employees be a little more comfortable. I'm going to have the hangout space. I'm going to have the luxuries, or maybe I will upgrade to that other building because if I'm going to invest so much in these people, I better make sure that they're happy and they're looking forward to coming to work. And I think that becomes so much more relevant, obviously, in a post-COVID environment where you have to convince people that it makes sense to come to the office. And so you have to make it worth their while. So it's an astute point for sure.
It's pretty interesting. The flip side of that is also true. When you see a company announce a reduction in real estate spend, what that really means is they're reducing headcount, and real estate spend just follows from behind. Because if you're going to make some sort of cost savings initiative within a company, your lead item on that is going to be headcount.
Right. Totally makes sense. Absolutely. So speaking of, cutting costs, within office space, there were a lot of spaces put on the market for sublease, during COVID, and then, in the downturn post-COVID, primarily driven by interest rates. But we saw a lot of sublease space come to the market. A lot of that space got leased eventually. Some still hasn't, but a lot of it got leased. And what we've seen from our data, we just put out a report that 31% of sublease space is expiring between 2026 and 2028. Now, the interesting thing about that sublease space is that 63% of the sublessors are paying higher rents than current market rents. However, the sublessees are paying 25-30% less than what the sublessors were paying, and in many cases that might be less than current market rents. So what's going to happen? You've got these sublessors, these sublessors obviously aren't renewing because they didn't want this space, they gave it up for sublease. So the landlords are going to have to find new tenants, and these guys that are in the space have been paying more than what the landlords can expect to get today. So they have a challenge. And then these sublessees have a challenge because the market rents are higher than what they're paying too. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen?
For the most part, those subtenants right now are going to have to leave. They're just not going to be able to afford the rent that's going to be expected of them because that delta is far too high. I think understanding the statistics, and we've seen the same thing at Savills as well. First of all, the supply of sublease space has improved by almost 50% from its peak during COVID. Right. So we've seen this massive improvement on space. I think there's a degree of survivor bias with the remaining sublease space. That's why you see such a high percentage of it that's expiring over the next 2 years, because a sublease is a depreciating asset that usually starts to approach zero once you get within the 2-year time frame. Now there are exceptions to the rule, but in general, I think it's a good rule of thumb. And so as a result of that, it's either not hyper attractive space, it's priced well under market, so a company that's going to be taking it cannot expect to stay on a direct basis without this enormous increase in their spend. And then C, it's a short sublease, so it's going to be pretty discounted. My advice to clients who call us with that type of situation, hey, we need to sublease our space, we've got 2 years remaining, price it right, price it low. Because right now you're responsible for 100% of the remaining obligation. Anything would be a good recovery. It's priced right. Don't accept 5 cents on the dollar, but price it right.
But for the space that actually has been sublet, where the sublessor is paying higher rent than market, and they're obviously not going to renew, the landlord now has to either try to rent it to the sublessee if the sublessee is willing to come up and rent enough, mm-hmm. but also they're likely going to take some sort of a haircut because the sublessors were paying more than market. Do you think that that's, given that there's so much expiring, is that going to put a damper on the market?
I'm not seeing it. And we've seen several different examples. I don't want to call out specific buildings, landlords, or subleases, but there are several large block subleases that are coming available over the next 2 years, and landlords are starting to negotiate on some of that space, and they're getting even forward commits on some of those blocks of space. I'm not seeing that be a large impediment. I think the challenge is going to be those subtenants finding space that's priced effectively within their budget. But from the landlord's perspective, again, there are exceptions to the rule. They're pretty excited to get that space back and capture that fig on the market rents.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about AI because we have to.
What would a podcast be without AI, Cheddar?
Yeah, but we're now at a point where fundamentally the world has changed, and that means it's changed for brokers, for what you're doing, but it also has changed for the tenants that you represent. You had mentioned that your clients are coming to the table with a lot more information than they used to. What are you finding is the impact of the information that they're bringing to the table and how they work with you?
It's a perfectly phrased question because we want our clients to be empowered. We want them to be knowledgeable, educated. It's why I love doing repeat work with clients because they're not starting from zero. And so it is in everybody's best interests to have clients who understand the real estate market and understand the dynamics better. I want them to be using every tool that's at their fingertips in order to arrive at that point. But what we're seeing is AI tools being used in a negative way with clients. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's not even one instance. This has happened with several of our clients over the last few months. We will negotiate a term sheet. We will enter into lease negotiations with the landlord, our client, of course, being the tenant. We will engage with an outside counsel to review the lease. So Savills shares their comments. The lawyer contributes their comments. The revised draft goes to the client for approval before we send it back to the landlord. And they come back to us something that's clearly AI generated and that's clearly misinforming them about what's to expect. Now, all of a sudden, a client that is 3,000 feet in a 3 million square foot building is absolutely convinced that they deserve lobby signage rights because AI told them so. And so we're put in this position where we have to de-educate our clients in a way that we never had to before. And it's a little bit of a silly example. It's a real example, but this has become major issues in a variety of different leases, putting at risk some deals that were at this teetering point at the 11th hour. I don't know if there's an easy solution to it, but I'm seeing this as a trend more and more.
So what you're saying is you got them the signage rights then, right?
Of course, 3,000 square feet for a 3 million square foot building, that's table stakes.
At the top of the building.
I wouldn't have thought about it unless their AI mentioned it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. Thank God they did that. That's great for you. Now, how about for you in your day-to-day? How are you leveraging AI, if at all, and how's it impacting the way that you move your conversations and your negotiations forward?
So many different ways of answering this question. So I'm going to give you how are we using it today, and I'm going to give you how we're starting to work with it to utilize it in the future. It is a very fast-moving world that is rather intimidating, and so I try to spend as much time on YouTube watching clips of how other people are utilizing AI and introducing it to their workflows, and trying to take bits and pieces from that. So I write pretty often on social media. I have trained Claude through the last 7-8 years of my writing on LinkedIn to understand my voice, my content. Now, I'm writing everything originally, but before I ever post it, I run it through Claude so that it could tell me if I've touched on the topic before, if I'm contradicting myself based on a previous post, to refine it if I need to shorten it into smaller words or smaller length. And so from a writing perspective, I've created an online editor through LinkedIn.
That's cool.
What I'm also doing is I'm using Claude in particular to analyze my email and calendar behavior. So I've connected it with my calendar and my email, and I'm using it to do some pretty detailed analytics around how much time it takes me to respond to emails, if I'm favoring some versus others, the difference between outside clients versus outside brokers versus internal, trying to understand and call out different spots within our business plan that we could be doing things better. We're also incorporating it into our CRM. To make sure that we're not missing people who we should be touching base with. We use Salesforce as our CRM. It's really important for us not to let things slip through the cracks, and at the same time, not to make it automated. So that's not what we're talking about here about automatic email canvassing. It's more about going through the data and calling things out in a way that's proactive. So those are a couple of some basic areas. We also use it to review leases, to confirm information. You can't do that without doing it yourself, but it could at least shine the spotlight on certain portions of the lease that really deserve your focus and attention. You do not ever want to be wrong with that. You'll lose a client for life if you
Sure.
if you're like, this provision, like what provision? That was hallucinated. But for doc review, it can be really effective as well. And the last thing I'll say is we've created this very entrepreneurial culture on our team where we have 3 different folks on our team right now experimenting with building agents on Claude to improve our workflows, maximize our efficiency. And that's the exciting part because I don't know where that's going to take us. We're going to fall before we can walk. But that's a really exciting upcoming change in how we practice our art.
I would think so. I mean, as I'm sure you did, I grew up in, cold calling, and that's how every junior broker starts, right? Is you're pounding the phones. Maybe now you're sending email cadences. That wasn't as much a thing when I was getting started. And to your point, you said you're not automating that much, but I got to imagine that some of your junior brokers, they're automating more of what they do. Yes, or
there's a front-end automation. I do not want them sending out automated emails. There has to be that thoughtfulness, that pause before they hit that send button. And so as a matter of team rule, they are not allowed to sign up for email automators. But all of the back-end work that leads up to you hitting that send button, all of that to some degree could be automated.
And have you noticed a tangible difference in the volume of outreach they're able to do or the conversion rates that they're getting?
Conversion rates have fallen off a cliff. I think as the noise in the market has increased, it's become harder to get through to the same people. And so if when we were started, it was maybe a 3 to 5% conversion rate, I think you're talking about 1% at this point. And so in order to hit the same number of numbers or same level of numbers, the output has to increase. And I would say that, well, just pick up the phone and call. It's much harder to reach people on their cell phones. I think half the world now has the Apple Auto, responder, and so it's much harder to reach someone on a call. I think the best way will continue to be relationship mapping and understanding how you can get into a company, be introduced to someone from a warm perspective. We're using AI in many ways to help with that. But that's the ultimate golden goose. Everything else is just increase the noise because everybody else's noise has increased.
That makes sense. I noticed myself that I used to answer phone calls when I didn't know who was calling because I was curious. And also, I think I'd just been trained as a broker. Brokers answer their...
You respect the game.
Yeah, I respect the game. When I was a broker, I'd answer the phone all the time and that, whatever. I enjoyed talking on the phone. Now there's just so much garbage. I do not answer my phone unless I know who it is.
How are you going to know if your car's out of warranty? How are you going to know that?
I've unfortunately made the mistake of trying to mess with those people before, and that just increases the volume of your calls.
If you give a mouse a cookie.
Oh my God. I'd be like, oh yeah, my car's a 1981 Hyundai Elantra, and then of course, I start getting calls about my Hyundai Elantra. It's not a good idea. Don't do that. Don't be me. Yeah, I literally don't answer any calls unless I know who it is. And now I miss some important calls because I won't do it. Yeah, you're right. The noise has increased, and I think we're ultimately going to see an increase in automation that then results in an inversion where human outreach and human approach and quality has to increase that much more because no one's going to tolerate that anymore.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you.
Although I'll tell you, when I was a broker, I felt that way even then. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna work smarter, not harder. I'm not gonna make 500 calls, but I'm gonna make the perfect call every time. I'm gonna research them and have a hook, and then I'd spend all this time researching a prospect. I'd call them up, and then they wouldn't answer the phone. And generally speaking, I found that the people who I worked with who focused more on quantity than quality actually had more success than me because I spent so much time preparing for calls that didn't amount to anything. So I don't know.
I know that pain well. The doofus next to you has the same opening and closing and gives no thought to the call, but they're pulling in a number of more meetings than you. I had the same experience in the bullpen when I was first getting started. It was very humbling, and it was also beyond encouraging because it made me realize that there's so many different ways of approaching the business. I felt the same way. I was like, wow, be smart. It's not about the numbers. I think you have to have the blend. There's no replacement for hustle. It's all about grit and putting in the time.
Yeah, totally. And I think, whether I wanted to admit it or not, part of my desire to have the most sophisticated call was a lack of grit and an unwillingness to just have the constant rejection, 100 times in an hour. I was, easier to take rejection 5 times in an hour.
I feel sorry that you're missing that extremely pathological component that every broker has.
It's wild. It's wild. I think we probably both worked with some very strange people who, because they, could handle just immense amounts of rejection, have been very successful in brokerage. They somehow are wired differently, or something happened in their childhood.
They're single-handedly funding the therapy life in New York for sure, no question about it. I like to say every broker is weird in their own appropriate ways.
That's true. That's a fair point. You kind of have to be to stick it out in this business.
Yes, there's got to be something wrong with you.
Yeah, totally. So I know you've actually, one thing that differentiates you from a lot of brokers that I know is that you've done a lot of deals outside of this market, and particularly I know you've done a good amount internationally. What's your perspective on doing deals throughout the world, and maybe you give us some anecdotes around international brokerage versus New York brokerage.
Yeah, it's another unexpected turn in my brokerage life, and it's a very welcome one. So in addition to how understanding how the rest of the world behaves makes you better at your craft in your home turf, it makes you better able to service clients. The origin of it started very humbly. I was doing work in New York, did a great job for a client. They said, "Can you help us in London?" And then they said, "Can you help us in Bucharest? Can you help us in Melbourne? Can you help us in Dubai, Tokyo, Sao Paulo?" And so all of a sudden now, it became something that was absolutely fascinating and put us in a position where we had to understand the markets and understand how to manage an account. And so a good portion of our business now is helping those clients manage their global real estate accounts. From a fun, happy, interesting story, about a year ago I was in Prague to tour some office product for one of our clients who was looking to expand there. And the reason why I call this one out is I hadn't been to Prague since I was studying abroad there for the semester. And just going back in this different environment, reacquainting myself with the streets was utterly fascinating. And the office space that the client ended up taking, I'm pretty sure, I haven't been able to independently confirm it, but I'm pretty sure I spent many a late night in this weird underground rave environment that's now been raised, and it's now this beautiful office building.
Wow.
So if you're the client and you're watching this, I never shared that story with you, but it's true. And it's pretty interesting to see the world in a different way. It also has a negative effect on my sleep schedule. There's never a period of time where you're not on. You go to sleep, Asia's up. You wake up, Asia's up, and Europe and America's in between.
Did you find it more difficult to try to manage these deals overseas? And how actively were you involved versus the local? I'm sure you worked with local brokers in any of these markets.
Yeah, Savills is 40,000 people globally, so we've got great teams all across the globe. I'm not the local market expert. My partners on the ground are the local market experts. But where I come in is helping to craft the strategy and what I call quality assurance. So you're going to get the same level of service from our team, regardless of whether they're working in Prague or Dubai or Sao Paulo. And so I'm involved, but helping to craft the strategy, ensuring there's execution, and making sure that we get the right approvals on the client side.
Makes sense. We just signed a new lease in Belgrade, Serbia. In fact, moved in on Friday.
This past Friday. Congratulations.
So I haven't been there yet. And I'll be there in June, and I'll be able to check it out. But looks pretty awesome. But it's been eye-opening. I mean, it's definitely. There's no. I don't. Look, I haven't done deals all over the world, but from what I understand of the data market globally for commercial real estate, there's generally speaking no better data and more robust data for commercial real estate than in the U.S. And running a data company and seeing comps all day long, I expect just a crazy amount of data to support the decisions that we're making, and just didn't have that, and it was very frustrating, just like trying to make decisions and hoping that you are making the right decision, but not having the data to support it is challenging.
I remember when you first started building CompStak. It was like, this idea ain't never going to work. Why does someone have to get access to comp sites that is a broker, only to become a very early, proud, and active user of the platform? And you are 100% right. The data that exists in the U.S., CompStak playing a big role in that, is without peer across the rest of the globe. Oftentimes we have to rely on a degree of data, but primarily the anecdotal storytelling of whoever our local broker is. It's much harder to find the breadth of data that exists in this country.
Yeah. Do you think that your clients are ultimately going to get access to more of that data directly outside of maybe the garbage advice that ChatGPT has been giving them? Are you expecting that your clients are going to get more access to raw data? I'm not suggesting we're giving it to them, off the bat, but more access to data and feel like they can handle more of this on their own. And how do you think about that?
I think it ties back to what I was saying earlier, which is I think the better informed a client is, the faster they're going to be in a position to help make decisions and work and execute on their strategy. So if you were to ask me this binary of is it better for clients to have access to the data or not, my answer with all information is going to be yes. Because the key is not having access to the data, it's understanding where it's relevant, and perhaps more importantly, understanding where it's not relevant and how that fits into the entire picture. If you look at the trend lines in terms of education of our clients over the last 20 years, they're infinitely better educated now than they were 20 years ago. It's just this trend of democratization of data. So gatekeeping in any capacity in our work is not going to be scalable and repeatable over the duration. That's not what builds trust. What builds trust is the advisory services, consulting on the right strategies for your clients, and helping them interpret the data, regardless of whether you're giving it to them or they're getting it independently.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to leave things. So I will remind everybody, if you're already watching this, so you must know how to, or listening to it, how to find us. But if you just stumbled upon this and you want to find more episodes of the Not Podcast, you can find us on any major podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and follow us on social media at CompStak in most places, but not yet on TikTok like your mom.
Safta Nina knows.
So look up Safta Nina knows. I'm glad we have an opportunity to promote her here.
She's going to be so happy about this.
And Gabe, you have a strong social media presence. Tell people where they can find you.
So LinkedIn is the primary platform. I'm on X as well, but a lot quieter there. But please follow me, hit me a follow, ask to connect, send me a little note. Try to offer up a front row seat to trends that are within the market. And I've got a 60 Seconds with Gabe video series if this wasn't enough for you. And so, reach out, follow. Would love to chat market or anything otherwise.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Gabe. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.